Hi and welcome to Let's Talk, all about books, social media and good times going on in Auckland. Carole Beu's in shortly with a great read from the shelves at the Women's Bookshop, and I'll be on about my word of the week, which is motto. There's an Olympic motto, of course, which is faster, higher, stronger. Joining me soon is a man who knows lots about the highest and the lowest sports behaviour, journalist Phil Gifford, who's got a new book out about astonishing rivalries. But first up is regular guest Catherine Smith, editor of the New Zealand Herald's Weekend magazine, who's got all the lowdown on what's going on in Auckland. Hi Catherine, welcome back to Let's Talk. Now here we are in mid-August, so what's going on around our town?
Well, it's spring is sprung.
I know.
It feels early, but it's springtime, and the best springtime thing I always think is the daffodils in Cornwall Park, and this year they're doing Daffodil Sunday. So they'll shut off Twin Oaks Drive, which is the magnificent centre of the park, I always think, and you can perambulate.
Is that that one that runs from sort of around the back of the hill towards Onehunga?
It's the main one, as you're coming in from Green Lane.
Right.
Yes,
Through
but
those
you can
big
get to it from all around.
stone
Exactly,
gates,
and
yes.
it's the double driveway and these beautiful big oaks, and they're all just starting to bud, only just. And all the daffodils underneath, and the lambs in the paddocks and the calves in the paddocks, and it's absolutely beautiful. And so they've shut it off, so you can actually walk along.
Parking could be a problem, I guess.
Oh,
but,
well, you know, if you're really good, you could bike there and then perambulate down. So I just think, yay.
Well, that's lovely. A gorgeous, quiet oasis in the middle of Auckland, which is always a fabulous place to drive through, let alone to walk through.
John Logan Campbell, what a gift.
He was a hero.
I've said this a million times. What a gift to the city. So it's that, and then if anybody's been counting, Sky Tower is 15 years old this week.
No. Really?
I know.
Gosh,
I know.
if somebody had said, I might have thought, about 10
I can't picture Auckland without it. So.
And remember the fuss before it was put up, and people said, oh, absolute blot upon the landscape. We can't possibly have this huge, monstrous thing. And now, of course, you know, as you say, we couldn't live without it.
Yeah, well, I loved when it first launched, they had these series of photos in the Herald of Where Am I? And so it was all around Auckland, from sort of Whangaparoa right as far south as you could go, with a photo with the Sky Tower, and readers had to, I presume, handwrite in those days and say where it was, because you could see it from all over Auckland. So it's this weekend, and you can do a $15 entry instead of the normal price. You can do a reduced price sky jump. I know you've been waiting for this opportunity. And there'll be Scotty Sky Tower and all that kind of stuff. But also what they've done is, I've not seen them in operation, but these new eye in the sky touch screens. So, you know, you go up there and you go, now where's that and what's that and can I find? Well, now you can, because it's all electronic and you touch it, and it's like having an iPhone, only it's big, and so you can figure out where you are. So
I've only eaten up there about twice, I think, both with overseas visitors. And it wasn't spectacularly good, I have to say. It's really interesting about food in high places, or in great tourist landmarks. It was really hard to get right.
They're really working on that. They're really trying, you know, they've done all that refurb on Federal Street, and they're about to start doing, you know, Federal Street festivals and things, and then they're really working on the Sky Tower, because, you know, that's the famous thing people say. But yeah, so I still love going up there, and I still love that slow curve as you watch the city unfold.
It's fabulous.
Yeah, so that's once every 15 years.
Okay.
Big Sky Tower. And then the other thing this week is it's Bee Week. Now, I'm not sure what we're meant to do about that, except I think we need to be conscious of the fact that without bees we don't have food, and it's a bit of an issue at the moment.
One hasn't heard much lately about the whole hive collapse disorder thing, which has been such a big problem overseas.
It's still a problem. It's still a problem. I think what will be fun is that this year they always, time of year, they harvest the honey off the town hall and do a big presentation to the mayor, and, you know, labels with the town hall on it and things. And I just think that's super cool that there's beehives and little bees working away.
And of course there are nifty places you can go to around Auckland, like Bees Online out west, where you can go and sort of see the bees working, which is a great place to take kids to, and have a stonking good lunch at the same time.
And Maureen, who founded that, is a major person in the bee world, so she's fabulous. If you want to be sort of arty and indoorsy, because, you know, it is still winter and you never know this weekend, the library still has Family Heritage Week, and I'm just going to do a wee plug for the Herald's Papers Past have got the first tranche of Papers Past have gone up.
I know, I've already been cruising in there.
It's so neat. So the Heralds from November 1863 to 1888 are up there, and then gradually they'll all be rolled out through to 1945. So it's a joint project, Auckland Libraries, National Libraries, Internal Affairs. I think Alexander Turnbull's had some things in there. And I keep thinking, oh, I'm researching a story, I have to go in and check.
Yes, for those who don't know, Papers Past has got so many provincial newspapers, and now, thankfully, the Herald as well. And it's fascinating if you know that you had sort of a great uncle, say, I don't know, Henry Jones or something, you can just type Henry Jones into the search panel, and up will come all the references to Henry Jones, and you can find out stuff about your ancestors that you never knew before sometimes. Like that they played the violin, or that they were taking part in a horse race, or that they died tragically on a river, or and whatever.
All the detail is
there.
Of committee meetings and all of that kind of stuff. And the big thing in Auckland in those days, of course, was the shipping news, because the shipping was the news channel that everybody got what was happening and who the famous people were, and you know what wars they'd been to and all of that kind of stuff.
But actually the big news was the murders and the hangings that followed, and the appalling detail in which newspapers then reported what it was like at the hanging is just something to behold.
I know, I love it. Oh, yeah. And then of course the other intriguing thing is that it was quite bilingual in those days, because the boundaries between Māori and Pākehā were very fluid. It was before, you know, the nasty devastation of the wars had started, and so a lot of Pākehā were bilingual, and there's whole chunks in the Herald that they just use Māori without.
Yeah, my great-great-grandfather was fluent, yes.
And all the shopkeepers and all the anyway, so that's a really exciting thing. If you want to do a little more past immersion, the Howick Village has their live weekend, and then Motat is doing a month of making a book by hand. So we're actually halfway through, so we've made the paper and we've started the printing press process, and then we're into bookbinding.
Wow.
And that's for adults and children with the craftsman from the bookbinding thing. And I just think that's wonderful to get children off their screens and into seeing this is how you do it. And there's a real resurgence in that, so that's kind of exciting. And then I guess the next thing is that it's time to start planting trees. And so the Living Legends Mucking In program, which has been running all around the country, is at Long Bay this Saturday, starting at 9. So bring your gumboots and you're helping to replant Long Bay.
Wow.
Which again is one of those gifts to the city. You know, Auckland suburbia could have kept going and going and going, and they drew a line.
Except suburbia is going up behind Long Bay, up on the hill. Have you been there lately? I went there a couple of months ago, and I couldn't believe the housing that's roaring along the hills at the back there. You can't see them from the beach.
From the beach, okay.
They've very cleverly pushed it back far enough so that they're not visible. But there's an enormous suburban sprawl going in there.
Yeah. Well, I know. There's
more pressure on the bridge.
I know. Well, you know, and then they won't let people densify in various places.
Not to mention the suburban sprawl up at Silverdale. And,
well, I'm heading south this weekend and going to Rotorua because it's their Wearable Art Awards, and I just kind of love the madness. These things go on for hours and hours and hours, and there's music and there's dance and there's, you know, fabulous creativity and things. And then on Sunday I'm going to...
Does it have a special Polynesian flavour as well, because it's in Rotorua?
Hard to tell looking at the photos from previous years. It definitely has a very big recycled, you know, green, you know...
I shouldn't have said Polynesian Maori, I meant,
yes, definitely in terms of music and things, but looking at the pieces, there seemed to be a lot of emphasis on upcycling and recycling and all that kind of stuff. And then I'm going to go and have a little sample on the newest of the new National Cycleways, Te Ara I
Oh, here you go, biking again.
I
You're
know,
one biking fanatic.
But it's lovely, because I've always thought with Rotorua, you're wasting it in a car.
Yes.
So they're starting it from downtown, you go around the lakes, you get to see some geothermal excitement, and it goes all the way down sort of into the forest.
And it's relatively flattish, except for that really hilly bit around the far side of the lake at Hamarano. It's very hilly there.
They've promised me, it's grade 1, Catherine, you won't have any problems, and they've definitely mapped out all the coffee stops.
Great.
Yeah, and I just think it's a perfect place, because I mean it's famous for its mountain biking, but that's rugged and hardcore.
So does it circle the lake?
It circles south.
Right.
and then goes to actually villages that I can't recognise the names, but relatively.
That'd be
fat.
fascinating.
Oh, it's just another string to their bow. And then if you really want to, you can go back next weekend and do the half marathon, which I'm sure you'll be lacing up your shoes.
Not the full.
As we speak.
Not the full.
No.
Yes. Well, that sounds like there's plenty going on, really.
It's surprising, really.
Yes, there's no excuse for us to be sort of just sitting on. We've been done far too much sitting on the couch for the Olympics, so it's about time we got out and did some stuff,
I know.
isn't it?
Well, I do need to rewatch that because that mad octopus, I have to see what was going on again.
It was just wonderful, wasn't it? Thanks so much, Catherine. See you next time. Something that never goes away in the world of words is the good old-fashioned motto. They've been around forever and have still not gone away, even if they've now got all tangled up with slogans and mission statements. In China recently, I kept on noticing a string of 4 words spread across motorway overbridges: patriotism, innovation, inclusiveness, virtue. Now, these aren't half bad as long as you don't take the patriotism one to extremes. But I wonder how many Chinese commuters take any notice of them at all as they drive underneath, especially as they're written in English. I remember once writing a magazine story about school mottos and ringing up a bunch of front officers. It was fascinating how many school clerical workers had no idea what their school's motto was. Some of the kids didn't know either. Googling something this week, I happened to come across the website for America's CIA. Yes, they too have a motto which says, "The work of a nation, the centre of intelligence." Now there's intelligence and intelligence. I suppose mottos are an intelligent idea, but if they don't have much impact, are they any use at all? Can you, for instance, remember your school motto? The Olympics have taught us again, if we needed reminding, that the whole point of sport is to win, to be able to say, "I'm number one, and here's my medal to prove it." That inevitably means rivalry between top contenders, which can mean tears for one and joy for the other. And sometimes it becomes extreme. Phil Gifford, longtime journalist, author and broadcaster, has seen it all and has just written the book. Hello, Phil Gifford. Welcome to the studio.
It's lovely to be here, Lindsay.
You're a great person to have in this week because, of course, we've all been riveted on sport lately.
Yeah, exactly.
And here you are with this book, Rivals, about
Yep.
sport's greatest battles. And just in the beginning of this week, we've been witnessing this amazing battle that's gone on over Valerie Adams and her first silver medal, and then a huge and unexpected and shocking turnaround to gold medal. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, can you?
No, you can't. And I mean, I would imagine if I was writing Rivals in a year's time, you'd have the Valerie Adams Ostapchuk rivalry in it, because one of the things that I absolutely love about sport, and I've been lucky enough to make a living in the field writing about it and talking about it for, well, since 1965, dare I say, but it's one of the things that I love about it, and I think people that love sport, is that it's theatre. And that's the part that, for me, so many stories, when I started researching this book and putting it together, there were stories that, in all honesty, if somebody had written them as fiction, and I brought a story to you and you were the book editor, you would say to me, "Phil, go away, rewrite it, because this is so ridiculous that it would never ever happen." And the reality is, in sport, as in life I suppose, but in sport it's on a more public stage, things happen that you just, I mean, one of my favourite, if you could call it that, I mean, obviously I didn't put a chapter in that I didn't enjoy, but the Tonya Harding, Nancy Kerrigan story about these are ice skaters. You do not expect in ice skating that a rival will get the dumb and dumber, if not dumbest, criminals in the world to try and break a rival's leg with an iron bar. But that's exactly what happened.
Yes.
And I knew that the Tonya Harding gang was the gang that couldn't shoot straight and they were dumb. But until I went and researched it and went on the internet and went to about a dozen different sources, and a bit from here and a bit from there, and the court cases and so on, I had no idea how unbelievably stupid Tonya Harding was, and her husband and their rat-faced group of accomplices.
Just incredible, that story, wasn't it? It had us riveted at those Olympics in the same way that Valerie's story has these days. Just before we move on from Valerie, I've been wondering in the last couple of days, I presume Valerie wouldn't have seen Ostapchuk as a rival, really, because until recently she was nowhere near her. Oh, she did?
Just for credit, yeah, she definitely did, because the thing about Ostapchuk was that she was incredibly erratic. but every now and again she would have an absolutely brilliant throw, and when you're in what in effect is a knockout competition.
Yes.
Yeah, no, she was without question her main rival, her most serious rival.
Okay, and without
hopefully
question,
now she won't be for quite a while.
she won't be at all.
Indeed.
Let's move on to some of these other wonderful sports stories. I nearly cried actually when I read your chapter about Ali and Fraser.
Yeah.
That was just an amazing story, wasn't it? The enormous
It is, and I mean,
hatred really that existed for so long between those two boxers.
Yeah, it was, and I mean, one of the things that you perhaps wouldn't have expected, and I again, it's one of those things that when you go closer to it and the more I read about it and the more I researched it, is that Muhammad Ali, who we worship, and in many ways very, very rightfully, but at times, to be honest, he could be a very cruel man, a very cruel man.
He said the most outrageous and terrible things, didn't he?
Awful
about
things.
Fraser.
Joe Fraser, he treated Joe Fraser abominably. It was unconscionable what he did to Joe Fraser, and it wrecked Joe Fraser's life.
Yes.
Joe Fraser, from the time he retired from boxing, was a bitter man until the day he died, and I'm afraid you have to hold Ali responsible for that. It's a very sad story.
Because he said how dumb he was and how ignorant he was, and he was so
And the
ugly
worst
that
thing
his
was
mother went and hid when he was born.
Exactly.
And I thought,
The
no,
worst
you
thing
couldn't
was he
say
played
that.
the race card against him. Against a guy who, if anything, lived a lot more of the Afro-American life than Muhammad Ali did.
Yes.
So it was, it's a bizarre story, but
and at one
fascinating.
stage, unbelievably, when Ali, our hearts were sort of tender at the time when Ali, already suffering from Parkinson's, was lighting the flame at the Atlantic Olympics. And Fraser said, I wish he'd fallen in. If I'd had the chance, I'd have pushed him in.
If I was there, I'd have pushed him in,
But then 40 years later, they finally thought, this is just nuts, and they were saying nice things about each other.
They apparently resolved it, and thankfully they resolved it. But tragically, by that time, Joe Fraser was basically on his deathbed. But they did resolve it before Fraser died, apparently, and I hope that's true.
Borg and McEnroe, the tennis players, that was this astonishing chapter about that too. And even about Borg's personality. I couldn't believe that he used to have his hotel room so icy to keep the strings of his tennis rackets taut that he would hear them snapping in the night as he was trying to sleep. I mean, this is nuts.
I had a vague memory, which I thought maybe I just dreamed that thing up. and I looked at story after story after story. And finally, I found confirmation of it in a book on Beyond Borg. Just very quickly, I mean, there's one of the things I love as a writer are quotes, funny quotes. I've got a great weakness for them. They'll win me over every time. One of my favourite quotes in the whole book is about John McEnroe and the disdain that the officials at Wimbledon felt for John McEnroe. And there's a great line there. I can picture the guy in his blazer and his collar and tie saying that the boy wonder is in the pavilion enjoying the traditional strawberries and cream without the benefit of the traditional spoon and fork. Got a picture of this really very uncouth young American just shoving this stuff in his mouth,
And of course the headline writers adored McEnroe, didn't they? They called him things like the Incredible Sulk, which I thought was wonderful, apart from Super Brat and everything.
Yeah, exactly.
But
he was a walking headline, really, wasn't he, at the time,
But and those two clashed, but not so seriously in terms of, I mean, nothing like the Ali and Fraser thing in terms of their personalities. It was more an on-the-court thing.
Yeah, and the intriguing thing was with them, and at the time you almost didn't notice, it's only with hindsight of McEnroe saying it, and when you look back on it, it's actually true. The one person that McEnroe didn't behave badly when he was playing against was Borg, and that's because, to a degree, McEnroe was almost a fan of Borg's and certainly had ultimate respect for him. And because Borg behaved so well, he brought out the best in McEnroe.
Yeah. Coe and Ovett, that's a fascinating chapter. We've seen a lot of Lord Sebastian Coe recently as being heading the whole fabulous London Olympics, but he and Steve Ovett had an amazing rivalry going on, didn't they?
They did.
Yes.
They really did. And one of the things about it which I found interesting when you dug into it a bit was that there was always the image that Steve Ovett grew up in a house with one of those terrace houses with a toilet outdoors and all that sort of stuff, and Lord Sebastian grew up in a castle. And while there's an element of truth in that, it's actually much closer together. There weren't quite the extremes, but the way they presented, because Sebastian Coe always spoke as if he was Sebastian the name of the teddy bear in Brideshead Revisited? It looked as if he should be carrying Sebastian, the teddy bear, under his arm. But their rivalry was fantastic. And talking about quotes again, another one of in fact we almost called the book that, but we decided rivals would be much less embarrassing for somebody to ask for at a bookstore. there's a quote from a British writer that when Steve Ovett upset Sebastian Coe in the 1500 metres at the Moscow Olympics, and when Ovett went to shake hands with Coe on the victory rostrum, a British writer said that the expression on Coe's face when Ovett reached out his hand for a handshake was as if he'd just been handed a turd.
So out of that remarkable sentence, what was the thought for the name of the book then? What might you have called it?
We toyed with the idea as if he'd been handed a turd, but we thought, I mean, then we said, hang on a minute, if you go into a bookshop and say, do you have that book as if I'd been handed a turd?
It's not going to happen.
No, not going to happen. No. I mean, a lovely nana's not going to buy a book called that for a grandson, is she?
Interesting that you've included in here the chess players, Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky, because a lot of people don't normally think of chess as a sport.
Including myself. The last chapter I wrote, and the only reason it got in the book was, I was sort of scanning around, and I had about 4 candidates for one more chapter that we were looking to finish the book off, and I wasn't absolutely on fire about any single one of them, and I went and just Googled online, great rivalries, and the Observer newspaper in the UK had made a list of sport's 10 greatest sporting rivalries. Some of them, in fact the bulk of them, about 6 of them, were already in the book. There were a couple that were about rivalries between football clubs in England that I thought, well, I've already got a fair bit of football in it. And then, but their number one choice, believe it or not, which startled me, was Fischer and Spassky. And it was only about a couple of paragraphs, and they said, yes, we know some people don't think chess is a sport, but this story has everything. The Cold War, it has insanity, it has bizarre behaviour and so on. So away I went, found story after story after story, picked a little, as you do, a little bit from here, a little bit from there, and the more that I researched it, the more I realised, yeah, they're actually right.
Fischer wasn't a well man, was he?
He was not a well man.
Insane request he made, like he had to have the toilet slightly higher than Spassky's toilet.
Well, I think the ultimate expression of the poor man's mental breakdown in this derangement was he became virulently anti-Semitic. He was more anti-Semitic than Hitler, and he was actually a Jewish person himself. So that's an expression of kind of weirdness. And the other thing about it that I loved when I sort of discovered it and it was confirmed by various people and various writers, is that at the time it was a very big propaganda thing, both from the Iron Curtain countries and from the free world, as they like to call themselves, the United States. And the States in particular, which is most of the publicity we got, presented it as a battle between Spassky from the Dark Empire, from the evil empire, and Fischer as a representative of the free world. And therefore Fischer must be a nice person and Spassky must be a terrible person. The reality is Boris Spassky, in every account, is a very urbane, charming, kind, decent person. Bobby Fischer, even before he had a complete breakdown, was an incredibly unpleasant, mean-spirited, nasty piece of work. And so I had to, if you like, completely flip-flop all the views that I'd held from back in the day.
You've done some great untangling of spin all around. Thanks, It's a great read. Long may your passion continue.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. It's been lovely.
Time for our video spot, which this week is an ad. Not something we usually run, but this one's so French, so outrageous, and so perfect for this time when we're all talking about the latest mission to Mars that it just seems like a good idea. The premise is that the world is melting and a brave and a glamorous astronaut has to go off to cool down the sun. We found this at a site called Leuze's Archives, which shows off the world's best advertising. It's silly, but refreshing. Hi Carole, welcome in from the Women's Bookshop, where you've no doubt been scouring the shelves to find us a good read. Tell all then.
Well, Bianca Zander is coming to Our Ladies Literati Sunday afternoon, the 19th of August, and she's one of the new novelists. We have established writers and a whole range of different people, and I try to promote new writers as well.
Oh, you're good.
So, well, I think it's important.
Somebody has to, after all.
Yeah,
yes.
and this is worth promoting. It really
Yes.
is. This is called The Girl Below, and in the story, Bianca, she does the reverse of what Bianca's actually done in her real life, which is she was born and lived in London and then came to New Zealand. This girl in the character, Suki, has gone back to London after 10 years in New Zealand. Now, she came to New Zealand rather rapidly when she was 19 because her mother died, and she was grieving and in shock and didn't quite know how to cope. So as quite a young woman, came to New Zealand where her father was. 10 years later, at the age of 29, she goes back to London, assuming that because she's lived in London all those formative years, that there'll be a life there for her. And of course, it's not that easy.
Everyone's moved on, I suppose. Yes.
People have moved
Yes.
on. Jobs are hard to get. She's got very little money. She ends up living on on the floor of a friend's flat. And London is just not quite as welcoming as she expected, and she starts to remember back to things that happened to her as a child in London. She ends up going to look after an elderly woman who was her neighbour years ago, and things come back to her and it gets slightly spooky. It's interesting. There was an incident in an air raid shelter in the back garden of the house when she was a child, when she and her parents and a friend, an adult friend, got trapped in the cellar, and there was a moment there where they might have got trapped permanently, but they were let out. But it's obviously haunted her, from quite young childhood. There's also a quite amusing, really scary, what would you describe it as? A statue, a sculpture, that she remembered this elderly neighbour had when she was a child, and this sculpture, this white sculpture of this rather weird-looking young woman, is still there. And it brings back all these memories and all the fear she had, including as a child a hand that used to come out of a cupboard. And so it's childhood stuff that she's remembering, but you're not quite sure. I mean, she's very unsettled back in London, very unsure of herself, very much trying to find herself, and you're not sure how much is she's a bit psychologically disturbed and how much is actually spooky things from the past coming back. So it's got that interesting element in it of you're not quite sure what's going on here. It's quite fun, really.
I heard it described as quite a magical novel. Would you use that word for it?
Yes, so sort of there's that touch of magical realism in it, really, where it's not quite reality, and you're not quite sure what's going on. But she does progress, obviously, and come to terms with who she is and so on. Very interestingly done. It's a coming of age novel in a way, but with a difference, with these sort of slightly spooky, slightly going back in time, otherworldly sort of elements to it.
And although you talk about something that happened in the air raid shelter, is this a contemporary novel, or does it go back a bit, or I mean?
Oh yes, it's contemporary, but it was an old air raid shelter from World War II that was still in the back of their garden and still covered over with a manhole cover on it.